welcome to Water Bear Reads, where I chat about illustrated classics and modern classics. My name is Heather, welcome. Today I wanted to share another Read a Book by the Decade video with you. For those of you who are new to my channel, my son and I began reading books by the decade as read aloud for story time, and we started during lockdown, and we actually began with an Irish themed book, Paddy's Pot of Gold from Dick King-Smith, and it kind of just took off from there. And I did a spring Read a Book by the Decade last season, and I wanted to do another one this season, but I was missing the 1920s, the 1930s, and the 1980s. And so I decided that I'll wait until next season to do another spring Read a Book by the Decade video. Through our reading, there has been so many books that I'm never quite sure what season to stick them in, but they don't really stick out as being one season over another. They're just all seasons. So if you're someone who loves to read literature, particularly children's literature, seasonally, then I have some all seasons book recommendations for you by the decade. Before I begin, I just want to take a moment to show some gratitude towards another booktuber who gave me the most wonderful mention a couple of weeks ago. It was after I filmed my Snow White video, so I didn't get a chance to thank her in my last video. I just want to say thank you so much to Kate at Howe Reads. It was really nice to get a mention and to be able to welcome some new subscribers. Welcome everyone. I'm going to take a sip of my tea. Today I'm drinking a green tea, which was a holiday gift from my friend Katie. It's the Secret Garden organic green tea, and so I'm enjoying that. So I'm just going to take a sip of green tea and then we'll get started. Before we begin, I just want to do a quick reading update. Every month I choose one classic to read to myself, one that is outside of my son and my reading life. In February, I read Sanditon by Jane Austen and another lady. I had actually started reading this last year, but things just got so busy that I ended up not finishing it, even though it was good. And so I just began again this February and started it, and I really enjoyed it. I'm going to chat about it on another video that's Jane Austen related at some point, but it was really good, and it seamlessly went from sounding like Jane Austen to sounding like the other author, whose name I'm forgetting at the moment. But yeah, she did a great job with it. I really liked it, and it was quite lovely. I enjoyed it. Also in February, I finished Magic Flutes, which inspired the beginning of this video. This was such a good book. It starts off following the life of the male protagonist in the story, and it follows his life, and he's a man who builds his fortune for the sake of winning someone's love. It feels like The Great Gatsby if Gatsby had come to his senses. The female protagonist, Tessa, you don't meet until a little bit later in the story. It's really beautiful and romantic, and by the way, wonderful seasonal description of all seasons. Actually, I would say this one mostly takes place in the summer. It was just a really romantic read, lots of opera and theater references as well, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'm definitely going to continue my Eva Ibbotson journey after this one. Let me read you the part of this book that inspired my opening. In Sweden, she said, rising to stand beside him and speaking very seriously, they have a word for a place like this. It's called a schmostronstela. I hope I said that right. A wild strawberry place. A place like that is special. It's the most special place there is. And this, by the way, is not set in Sweden. It's set in Austria. But I just love that part. I thought it was wonderful. And I do have a place like that. I just never knew what to call it. So I'm just going to start referring to it as my wild strawberry place. Another book that my son and I just finished, and we started reading this one in March, was Misty of Chincoteague. And this was such a delightful read. Paul and Maureen are determined to own this wild horse off the Virginia coastal islands of Chincoteague. The horse's name is Phantom, and Phantom now has a foal. They work really hard to attain this horse. It's a great read for grandparents and children, especially grandfathers. We really enjoyed it, and one of my Instagram followers told me to go ahead and read Bridie of the Grand Canyon next. She said it was really good, so I'll be interested to do that. That's what we finished reading. Now we are currently reading, with my son, I'm reading Understood Betsy by Dorothy Canfield Fisher, and really enjoying this. He is too. I found this version at a local thrift store. This one's illustrated by Kimberly Bulkin Root. They have these little chapter illustrations as well as some interior illustration. So yeah, been enjoying it. Understood Betsy. It's been on our TBR for a long time, so I'm glad to finally get to it. And then speaking of TBRs, I am finally reading a book that I have wanted to read for a very long time, and that is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Every year I keep putting this off, and this year I was like, no, in March I'm going to read it. Oscar Wilde is from Dublin. And I also have this weird thing where in March I like to read a book that has a color in the title. So there we have gray. I'm on the second chapter now and I am enjoying it so far. Oscar Wilde's prose are just beautiful. I found this version in my local bookstore. It's illustrated by Eugenia Nobati. I also wanted to show you guys a book that I'm about to wrap up and give as a gift to one of my good friends here in Maine. It's a version of The Great Gatsby, and it's really beautifully illustrated. It has Dr. Eckelberg's eyes on the billboard. I love that. I just love this version so much. If you're looking to give someone A Great Gatsby as a gift, I thought to show you this real quick because summer's coming up. It's a great summer read. The Great Gatsby by Adam Simpson. So that's it for my reading update. Now to begin with my all seasons read a book by the decade. So first I'll begin with the 1800s, and published in 1880 by Johanna Spyri is Heidi. Heidi's one of those books that is chock full of seasonal description. Gorgeous seasonal description, but it's of all seasons, and I just couldn't decide which season to choose. I know that a lot of the covers give it the feeling of spring or summer, as you see here, but so much involves winter and the snow and sledding down the mountain with grandfather, and I couldn't only attribute it to spring. It just didn't seem fair. Heidi is about an orphan girl who's living with her Aunt Dita. And Aunt Dita can no longer look after her. She needs help, and she takes Heidi up to live with grandfather up in the Alps on the mountains. And grandfather is a citizen of the village that is a bit of a curmudgeon. He's known for being antisocial. He's a hermit. He stays up in his cabin, and everyone is just feeling so sorry for Heidi, who has to go live up there with this man. What is going to become of her? But it turns out that Heidi absolutely blossoms under his care. She was meant to live in the mountains, and she meets a good friend there, Peter, who takes care of grandfather's goats, and she just loves it there. At some point, it becomes apparent that she needs to go to school, and she gets taken away from grandfather, and it's just how she handles that following what happens after that. This version is by Alma Classics, and it's illustrated by Susan Hellard, who is from North London, and she illustrates it in these beautiful, humorous, charming chapter heading illustrations, like this one, for example. This one is only part one of Heidi. It ends when grandfather returns to the village, when he starts socializing again. It's really only half of the story, so you have to get the second part, which I'll put up on the screen. We ended up reading the Illustrated Junior Classics edition, which has both parts in it. And this one is illustrated by William Sharp. Here's one to begin with. William Sharp was an Austrian illustrator whose real name was Leon Schleifer. And he served in World War I and then started doing illustrations for a newspaper in Berlin. And while he was working there, he did some caricatures of Adolf Hitler and the National Socialist Party, and found himself in need of escaping Germany. So he then moved to the United States, where he changed his name to William Sharp and began illustrating children's books. And they're just beautiful. As I've said before, Illustrated Junior Library editions, even though they're older, they tend to have so much illustration coverage. Even on pages where there isn't any illustration, there'll be like a small illustration, like one of these. So we just really enjoy reading them this way. One of my very, very favorite secondhand finds last year was his version of The Moonstone. I was just so excited when I found this book. I showed you more of this book when I was doing my autumn book haul video, but yeah, it was a wonderful find. So the next decade is 1900 to 1910, and published in 1908 is Anne of Green Gables. This is another one. I always struggle. Where do I put it? Sometimes I think spring, sometimes I think autumn. But the truth is that there is beautiful seasonal description of all seasons. Anne arrives in the summer. She arrives in June. And then you also have that wonderful summertime picnic where Anne gets her first taste of ice cream. Later on in the book, you have that chapter, The Unfortunate Lily Maid, where Anne gets stuck in the boat and has to be saved by Gilbert Blythe, which is one of my favorite things. And then in the autumn, you have another wonderful chapter where Anne accidentally intoxicates Diana. And in the winter, she redeems herself by saving Diana's little sister, Minnie May, who has the croup. That Haunted Woods chapter, which is actually in the spring. And I always think that chapter where they're walking through the Haunted Woods is in the autumn, but it isn't, it's in the spring. And then of course you have the event at the end of the book that happens in the spring, the sad part where Anne drops her bouquet of narcissi. It's one of those books that I just really struggle to place. This one is also illustrated by Susan Hellard. I just showed you her Heidi. I really love her style. It just makes me happy. And of course, it's just the chapter heading illustrations, but they're so pretty and lovely, and I love the cover art. She also does Alma Classics' version of Dr. Dolittle, as well as the What Katie Did series. But yeah, so 1900 to 1910, Anne of Green Gables. Now we are in the decade 1910 to 1920, and this book was on my top 10 books of 2023, as well as a firm runner-up on my son's list, and that is Lad, a Dog by Albert Payson Terhune. And I wish everybody would read this book. It is just such a wonderful book. It just makes me so happy. And don't worry, it's not an Old Yeller situation at all in this book. I need to read Old Yeller because it's my dad's favorite book from his childhood. And I haven't done it. I saw the Disney film and it made me so sad that I just haven't wanted to read the book, but I need to just face my fears and read it. Lad, a Dog is another book that is just very difficult to place seasonally. A lot of the major scenes occur in both spring and winter, and if pressed, I would probably say read it in winter. But there's also a major event that happens in October when Lad saves his mistress from drowning. And then there's another event that happens in the summer during a 4th of July festival. It's just all round, and the seasonal description is wonderful, and I really enjoyed it. Lad is a remarkable dog, and it starts off where he and a female dog lady are living with the master and mistress, and they have to keep, for a short time, they have to keep another collie by the name of Knave. And Knave is a very naughty dog and manages to cause trouble in just such a way that Lady and Lad get blamed for it. One of the remarkable and reoccurring things that happen in this book is how so often Lad is underestimated or misunderstood, and then how life or Lad himself teaches the humans that they're wrong, and then they have to feel bad because they realize that they were wrong. And so that was kind of what I really enjoyed about reading this book. It's just a wonderful, wonderful read. I highly recommend this book. It's illustrated by Sam Savitt, and he's an illustrator who was from Pennsylvania, and his work is mostly equine related. Most of his work is horse illustration. I decided to show you this illustration because it has a snake in it, Year of the Snake. Here's another event that takes place in the winter, with a younger dog falling through ice. This adorable illustration with the lamb. Sam Savitt also did some posters for the Kentucky Derby, and one of the most famous how to draw books, How to Draw Horses, which kind of is a real classic in the How to Draw series of books, was by him. I thought I would read a little bit of seasonal description to you so you could get an idea of the writing. The puppy reveled in the snow. He would roll in it and bite it, barking all the while in an ecstasy of excitement. His gold and white coat was thicker and shaggier now to ward off the stinging cold, and the snow and the roaring winds were his playfellows rather than his foes. I also wanted to show you this picture book version that I have that is adapted by Felix Sutton, not to be confused with Felix Salten, who did Bambi. It is illustrated by William Bartlett and Harry Michaels. I thought I would show it to you because it shows a lot of the seasons in the illustrations. This was in October, and here we have a beautiful spring day. Published in 1919, Lad a Dog, Bambi, Life in the Forest. I've talked about Bambi several times before because I love it so much. It was my top read of 2023. This book is so chock full of beautiful seasonal description. There is an entire chapter devoted to a leaf falling off a tree as autumn turns to winter, and it is beautiful. It is just fantastic. I just don't know which season to put this in like the others because there are so many descriptions in every season and so many important events that happen in every season. So yeah, definitely an all seasons book. This one is beautifully illustrated by Alenka Sotler, who is from Slovenia, and I love it. I've said before, the reason I love it is because her illustration matches the age that this book should be read at. And that's why I love it so much, but also because it's just gorgeous. This I think would be I think this is in the spring or summer. Gorgeous winter scene. That's so pretty. Some lovely autumnal illustration there. I thought I would just quickly read you a little bit from it because just so you can get a sense of how beautiful it is. Multicolored stars arose from the numerous and diverse flowers on the ground, so that the forest earth sparkled as dawn was breaking in a silent and fervent gaiety of color. Everything smelled everywhere of fresh leaves, blossoms, moist earth, and green wood. When dawn broke, or when the sun went down, the entire forest resounded with 1,000 voices, and from morning until evening the bees sang, the wasps hummed, and the bumblebees buzzed through the fragrant and peaceful woods. Isn't that gorgeous? It's like that throughout the book. It's wonderful. But yeah, so that's my 1920s seasonal recommendation, Bambi. Now we are in the 1930s, and the books that I want to recommend for you from the 1930s are the Little House series. This is another one that I just never really know where to place it. We do tend to read these in the winter, and I think it's just because this one sort of feels a little bit more wintertime, and of course there's the long winter later on in the series, but really there is beautiful seasonal description all year round. There are fantastic Christmas scenes in here, beautiful harvest scenes. There's a maple syrup scene in March, this time of year, which, by the way, we have Maple Syrup Sunday coming up, not this weekend, but the weekend after. So that'll be lovely to go to. I can't wait for that every year. It signifies the start of spring for me. Each one of these mostly follows a year or a couple of years in the life of the Ingalls family, with the exception, of course, of Farmer Boy, A Year in the Life of Alfonso Wilder. There's dangerous animals, there's grasshopper infestation, there's fires, there's floods, there's crazy weather events. There are just so many exciting moments. And also, most of these books center around Pa. These books really are a love letter from Laura Ingalls Wilder to her father. And so much is about his day-to-day activity and about how he cares for them, how he runs the farm, how he harvests his crops. And it's just about survival, and my son really enjoyed them. I love reading them myself. These four here were all written in the 1930s. Big Woods was written in 1932, followed by Farmer Boy in 33. And then in 35 was Prairie, and in 37 was On the Banks of Plum Creek. We just finished reading this in January, and my son really enjoyed it. I loved it. I love this one because it's different from the others in that Ma shines in this one. In the other two that we've read so far, Pa really shines, but this one, Ma shines, and I thought that was really cool. And I also love that the book starts off with them moving into what is essentially a hobbit hole. Ma calls it the dugout, but the way it's described is basically a hobbit hole. And it's just really exciting. So many things that I never thought about. Illustrated by Garth Williams. Here's that maple syrup scene that I told you about. Garth Williams was born in New York City, but grew up on farms in both New Jersey and Canada before returning to the UK, which was where his parents were from. He actually studied architecture in the UK as well as other areas of Europe. And then during the bombings, he worked for the British Red Cross. And then at one point it became too dangerous, and he ended up sending his wife and daughter to live in Canada. And then he moved to New York. And his career really began when E.B. White sent in Stuart Little to the publisher with a note attached to it saying, "Try Garth Williams." And they did, and his career took off from there. He went on, not only did he illustrate these little house books, but he illustrated Charlotte's Web, and also George Selden's A Cricket in Times Square, and many, many, many other books. Now we're in the 1940s, and the book I have for you is by an author who's quite famous for her The Cat Who Went to Heaven, Elizabeth Coatsworth. But this is not the book I wanted to show you. The book I wanted to show you was published by Purple House Press. It's 12 Months Make a Year. And it has just been such a wonderful read. It's a book where each chapter is labeled by a month of the year. I've now just finished March. It follows the lives of 3 children and their father, Jean, Lydia, and Mark. And they're grown up and often protesting Cousin Mary through each season. Just small slice of life events that are very relaxing to read and cozy. And I also find them rather informative. For example, in March, they purchased a new family car, which they've named the Dragon, and they're taking off on an adventure, and they go to a maple farm, and we learn about the process of making maple syrup. And one of the things that was mentioned that I think is so important is how the technique for making maple syrup was handed down to the early settlers by the Iroquois. The Iroquois taught the early settlers how to make maple syrup. And I thought that was so fantastic that that information was included in there. I'm just taking it easy and reading it one chapter every month. This came highly recommended from the publisher of Purple House Press. When I purchased it, she said she was so happy that I'd purchased this one because it was one of her favorites. And she loved it so much, she went crazy just researching about this family and where they lived. And they lived in Hingham, Massachusetts, which is not too far away from Cape Cod. And the illustrator, Marguerite Davis, it's actually quite difficult to find very much information about her, but she seems to be from Quincy, Massachusetts. Here's from the March chapter I just read, where they go to a maple syrup farm. This one is from May, and I thought I would show you this since I was just talking about Lad, a dog, and since they're collies. Here's a little bit of the seasonal description that you will encounter when you read this one. That afternoon the blizzard snowed itself out. First the wind began to drop, and the snow fell softly as down. Then it thinned, and the flakes grew larger, and at last stopped. It was beautiful outside. The sky was black above a world of white and silver. Some leftover icicles gleamed like fringes of glass from the eave. I thought that was really pretty. What I also love about this is that there is a poem at the end of every chapter. So this is the one for the end of March, and I'll just read the first one to you. In the maple sugar bush, when the first sap flows, the air has the sweetness of the chill melting snows, and the March breezes sound to the clamor of the crows. Now we're in the 1950s, and I want to share another series with you, and that is the All of a Kind Family series by Sydney Taylor. I've spoken about these before. I do a buddy read with my bookish friend Celeste from A Reader's Almanac, and last year we read the third in the series, More All of a Kind Family. And this year we are reading All of a Kind Family Uptown. I'm about 2 chapters in now, and the first chapter made me laugh so hard I was crying. I had tears streaming out of my eyes. It was just hilarious. I had to mention these because every book goes through a year or almost a year in the life of this wonderful Jewish family living in New York's Lower East Side. And it's a family of 5 girls and 1 boy, and they are just darling. And I had to mention these in the seasonal video because each book goes year-round and follows certain holidays, Judeo-Christian holidays, as well as Thanksgiving and the 4th of July and May Day. They're wonderful reads, full of funny bits, full of sad bits. What both Celeste and I love about these books is that Sydney Taylor is not afraid to chat about social issues of the time, poverty and homelessness and disease and war, which is where we are in this book. They're just remarkable reads. I haven't done my research on Uptown yet, so I can't say when Uptown was written. I know it was published after Sidney Taylor died in the 1970s. But the first 3 were written in the 1950s, but I know the second one was only published in 1972. And it's because the publisher thought the material was too harsh for a children's book, so they wouldn't publish it. But later on it was published. It's one of my favorites. It's this one, All of a Kind Family Downtown. So yeah, and they're all illustrated by different illustrators. This first one is Helen John. One of the other things I love about these books is how many other books are referenced or mentioned in the books. This one mentions Charles Dickens and another book that I've never read called Peter and Polly in Winter by Rose Lucia. And this one begins and ends in September. And then All of a Kind Family Downtown begins on a cold November day and ends on Thanksgiving. I actually recommended this in my autumn Read a Book by the Decade video that I did last year. And this one is illustrated by Beth and Joe Crush, who you would know as the illustrators of The Borrowers as well as Miracles on Maple Hill. I just love their illustrations. This was at a Purim play, the celebration of Queen Esther. And this one references Aladdin and Andrew Lang's Red Fairy book. And then more All of a Kind Family as well as All of a Kind Family Uptown are both illustrated by Mary Stevens, who you would know if you are a fan of the Trixie Belden series. She illustrated the first 6 mysteries, I think. And they're just beautiful as well. Here's a gorgeous seaside illustration. More All of a Kind Family begins with a summer wedding and ends with a late summer wedding, and references Anne of Green Gables and Anne of Avonlea, which I thought was lovely. And then I don't know much about Uptown yet, but the first chapter talks about how it begins a month after the United States went to war with Germany, and that would place it about May 1917. Also, it just happened to catch my eye that there's a mention of Wuthering Heights. I was just looking ahead and just happened to notice it, so that was pretty cool. This series has just been a wonderful one to read, and I highly recommend it. Full of small, very unremarkable, home-like events, but also full of very large, important events. It's such a great mixture. All of a Kind Family from the 1950s. The next book is from the 1960s and published in 1962 is Tove Jansson's Tales from Moomin Valley. I talked about this book back during the holidays because we picked it up to read that beautiful Christmas story called The Fir Tree, which is just wonderful. After the holidays, we went back and we reread the other stories in January, and we found that it pretty much has 2 stories for each season of the year, beginning with the spring tune, where Snufkin is trying to come up with a piece of music to celebrate spring, but he keeps getting interrupted. And it just goes on through the seasons. We have one in the summer where the Filly Junk decides to wash her carpets, and another one, Moomin Troll finds a dragon and he wants to keep this little dragon as his pet. But then when Snufkin comes around and he shows the dragon to him, the dragon prefers Snufkin, and Moomin Troll is trying not to show that his feelings are hurt, that this dragon is preferring his friend, his best friend, to him, and Snufkin is trying to push the dragon away because he doesn't want to hurt Moomin's feelings. It's just a very charming story and full of meaning. And then we move into the autumn, and then we have a story called The Hemulin Who Loves Silence, as well as one of the more famous tales of the Moomin Valley tales, and that is The Invisible Child, which starts off with the Moomin Troll family gathering mushrooms during the autumn season. Just beautiful seasonal description throughout and some wonderful tales. So it's a lovely book to pick up, and you can read the tales for each season, which I think would be just a lovely thing to do. Tove Jansson illustrates all her wonderful characters in deft line drawing, and the result is utterly charming and unique. This is from the Filly Junk Who Believed in Disasters. This is the one set in summer, and there's a terrible summer storm going on. Here's from The Last Dragon in Moomin Valley. Tove Jansson is from Helsinki, Finland, and Tales from Moomin Valley are her only Moomin-themed short stories. If you haven't entered this world of Moomins yet, you may want to start with Comet in Moomin Valley, which is where we began. Here's the Christmas tree at the end in the story of the fir tree. Now we are in the 1970s, and a book I have loved from childhood that just brings up all the nostalgic vibes for me is this pop-up book of gnomes, which I found at a garage sale a few years back. and was so happy to find it. If you ever had this one, you'll totally remember these wonderful pop-ups. It was just such a walk down memory lane for me. So you can imagine how happy I was when back in 2023 I saw that they were republishing Gnomes by Vil Hugen and Rien Poortvliet. This book, Gnomes, was published in 1976. And it's just beautiful. It covers the lives of gnomes. It talks about their family life, about their traditions, their cultures, their ways of making food, and the way that they help animals. It even has a map showing where the gnomes are distributed. And I just love this book so much. The first part of it is almost a non-fiction type look at gnomes. And then the second part is stories about them. There's 9 stories or tales about the gnomes. And they're just illustrated so beautifully. Vil Hugen and Rien Poortvliet are from the Netherlands. And here in the historical background section, they talk about how a Roman who had been living in the Netherlands, he had written down that he had come across a gnome. And he wrote the following description in AD 470. Today I saw a miniature person with my own eyes. He wore a red cap and a blue shirt. He had a white beard and green pants. He said that he had lived in this land for 20 years. He spoke our language mixed with strange words. Since then I have spoken with the little man many times. He said he was a descendant of a race called Kuwalden, a word unknown to us, and that there were only a few of them in the world. He liked to drink milk time and again, and I saw him cure sick animals in the meadows. Vil Hugen lived in a house where Grimm's fairy tales and Selma Lagerlöf's The Wonderful Adventures of Nils, very popular, and he grew up on these stories. So he was heavily influenced by the two. By the way, we read this last spring and we loved it. It was just fantastic. If you've ever wanted to read The Wonderful Adventures of Nils, this is a good time to read it because it begins in March and ends in April. The illustrations in here are just beautiful. The reason I recommended it for this video is because of the beautiful depictions of the seasons. Let me show some to you by Rien Poortvliet. Here's a gorgeous one from the autumn. Here you have winter, and here's another autumn section, but also this is the Legends of the Gnomes. There's 9 of these, as I was explaining before. They're wonderful tales, just relaxing reading. I also love this part where there's maps showing their distribution around Europe and Canada and America, and I was so excited to find that there are gnomes living in Maine. Just at one heads up, there is a waist up, full frontal nude gnome, as well as some other slightly nude pictures in here. I like to think of them as gnudity with a G. Now we are in the 1980s, and whenever you think of witches, you automatically think of autumn. But I have one witch book that I just do not know where to place, and that is Aiko Kadono's Kiki's Delivery Service. So many amazing events happen throughout the year that it's just very difficult to pin down which season this really relates to the most. Kiki is leaving home. She's heading out on her own. She's going to become independent. She has her cat Gigi with her, and she heads out on her broom, flies around and finds another town, and she decides when she gets to the town of her choice to set up a delivery service. A very smart idea for somebody who can fly around on a broom. She has a nice radio too, by the way, which keeps her entertained while she's flying. It begins in the early summer, and it's a little bit later in the heat of the summer that she rescues someone from the ocean who becomes one of her good friends. Another dramatic event where the yellow ginkgo leaves are blowing in the wind, and a happy birthday note, a very important happy birthday note, gets blown out of her hands, which leads her to meet someone else that becomes instrumental in the story. There's also another extremely dramatic event that happens on New Year's Eve, which I thought was really exciting. And then it ends in the spring with beautiful spring description, and the author, Aiko Kadono, writes more spring description in the final 2 chapters than she does throughout the rest of the book for any of the other seasons. There's a lot of the cottagecore element in here, the bakery shops and the flower shops that you see a lot of as well. So if pressed, I would probably say read this in the spring. But really, it's just an all seasons read and very enjoyable for any time of the year. It's illustrated by Japanese illustrator Yuta Onoda, who has also done the cover art for The Orphans and the Ogress and The Girl Who Drank the Moon. And I was looking at her Instagram account, and there are so many books that she's done the cover art for that I would really like to read. That is Kiki's Delivery Service, 1980s. Another collection of stories, some of which were written in the 70s, some in the 80s, and a couple in the 90s. And I decided to put it in the 90s category because two of my very favorite stories were written in the 90s. And that is James Herriot's Treasury for Children. The two stories I love is Smudge, the Little Lamb, and the one about the cat who goes out, A Cat About Town. I really love that one. A Cat About Town is about a cat that was found and that James Herriot and Helen nursed back to health, and then they find that this cat goes out and just goes to all these social events. You know, wherever there's a social event happening, this cat likes to show up. And I always laugh so hard, and it's very endearing because the family who owns the cat actually finds the cat, and it's just wonderful. And then Smudge, the Little Lost Lamb, always stays in my mind because of the illustration. I'll show it to you. This illustration, I just love it so much, and it just amazes me every time I look at it. So, and I just also love the story about a little lamb who also goes off on its own and climbs through a fence, takes off, gets lost, almost dies, and then gets found by a girl who thinks it's just a lump of snow. This lamb has been born early in the spring, and there's a late spring snow. I love both of those stories, and they were both published in the 90s. There's 8 stories in this treasury, and 6 of them were illustrated by Ruth Brown, and the first 2 were by Peter Barrett. And there's beautiful description throughout the whole treasury of the seasons. So many different seasons. Christmas stories in the spring and the summer and the autumn. Here's the Christmas Day Kitten, and it has illustrations by Ruth Brown. Just love this one. It feels so cozy and warm in there. And here is one that's during the summertime with the roses in bloom. Peter Barrett is another illustrator from the UK who did a ton of animal-related books that you might know, but the one that caught my eye was he did a version of The Wind in the Willows. I love his style as well. It's a little more muted than Ruth Brown and a little more delicate, it seems, but I love them both. But yeah, so this is just another treasury full of stories from every season, and a joy to read, a joy to pick up. I never know when to recommend these stories because they take place all throughout the year. And this is my 90s recommendation, although it could have also worked for the 70s or 80s, but I decided to go with the 90s, and that is James Herriot, The Treasury for Children, the Harry Potters. Usually I recommend them in the 90s, but we've read the 4th in the series, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, this past autumn. And so now I can say that we are in the 2000s with the Harry Potters. So that is fantastic. It opens up my 90s for other books, which I haven't been able to have as many other books outside of Harry Potter. But I couldn't leave these guys out because there's just so many wonderful events, holidays that happen throughout the year, and they're marvelous, they're wonderful. Some beautiful magical descriptions of Christmas and Halloween. Goblet of Fire has such a springtime feel. The story begins when Harry Potter joins the Weasleys for the Quidditch World Cup, which is Ireland against Bulgaria. There's all these Irish festivities, and then later on when they're given the tasks, one of the first tasks is to find and retrieve a dragon's egg, which they then have to figure out how to open. It just feels very springtime to me. In the original book, the chapter headings, you can see it as well. Very St. Patrick's Day, that one. The egg having to be opened. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone has the most memorable Christmas scenes, as well as Halloween scenes. I go back and forth. I can't quite figure out which one I feel more, but when I think of the Christmas scenes from Harry Potter, I think of them from the Sorcerer's Stone. Really all-around cozy vibe to it. It gives you a real feel of winter. I just really love it. With all the fireplaces. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets just really speaks summertime to me. The Whomping Willow. The Whomping Willow is just one of the things about Chamber of Secrets that really sticks out to me. It begins a little earlier in the summer when Harry goes to stay with the Weasleys. which I love this page by Mina Lima. Isn't this awesome? And then you also have the mandrakes, which also stick out to me, the screaming mandrakes. There's just a lot of like floral description and botanical description in this one. It really has this nice summertime feel to it. And then you get to The Prisoner of Azkaban, which I recommended in my autumn Read a Book by a Decade video, because you have so many elements of the autumn. You have the Dementors, you have another thing that is usually associated with autumn, but I can't give it away for those of you who might have not read Harry Potter. You have Beaky, who is tied up outside Hagrid's cabin in the pumpkin patch. It just has this more sort of spooky vibe to it. I wanted to recommend these because I just feel like not only do the Harry Potters go throughout the seasons, but also each book that we've read, the first 4 anyway, do feel like they have their own seasonal lean on top of that. So now we're in the 2010s, and the books that I want to recommend to you for the 2010s are another series of books about a family, but they don't go throughout the year. They only cover a small piece of the year. Each one covers a different season or part of the year, but the books themselves throughout the whole series covers the entire year and all the seasons. And those are The Vanderbeekers of 141st Street. And I think these are just the most remarkable books. My friend Erica first read this and recommended it to me, and it was on my TBR, and then Miranda Mills had it in one of her book clubs. And so my son and I both joined in her book club for this one. And it was just such a wonderful, delightful read, and we got hooked on it. We kept going, and we have now read the entire series. It's about a family with 5 kids, 4 girls and 1 boy, living in a brownstone in New York. And the first one begins where they find out that they have to move out of their brownstone building just a few days before Christmas. And the second one is The Vanderbeekers and the Hidden Garden, and it begins in June. The third one is The Vanderbeekers to the Rescue, and that one's a great one to read this time of year. It begins in February and goes through spring break and ends in April. And then the fourth one is The Vanderbeekers Lost and Found, and that's in the autumn, in October, with the New York City Marathon on the horizon. And then the fifth one, The Vanderbeekers Make a Wish, as well as the one following this, The Vanderbeekers on the Road, are both set in August. Both of these books kind of go together. They're surrounding the events of their dad's birthday. The final one, The Vanderbeekers Ever After, begins in September, and I'll let you figure out when that one ends. But they're all just so wonderful. I really enjoy them. Every single one of them has held me captivated and charmed, and just I have loved them so much. So I had to recommend them for the 2010s. Karina Jan Glazer, when she began, illustrated them in just buildings. This first one just has building illustrations throughout. But as the series continues, there's more intricate illustrations, such as these ones right here. There's another one I had to show you because it kind of related to gnomes that I showed you earlier. Every chapter heading has sort of a different chapter heading illustration. And I would like to collect the whole series just to have on the shelves because I really love them. I think, along with the Wild Robot series, that these will become a classic. So now we are in the final category, the 2020s, and last year named the Kirkus Best Middle Grade Book of 2023 was The Wheel of the Year by Fiona Cook and illustrated by Jessica Rue. And I love this book so much. This is actually a book that I've been wanting to show you guys. I need to do a book haul video pretty badly. I have to show you guys all the books I got for the holidays as well as Valentine's Day. This one I've been reading and I couldn't leave it out of an all seasons video, no way. So it is immaculate, it's beautiful. Jessica Rue is a Nashville-based freelance illustrator, and she has done just such a beautiful job with this book. It's a book about finding the magic that each season brings. And how it's done is it divides the year up into 8 parts, 2 solstices, 2 equinox, and 4 cross-quarter days. And it has beautiful illustrations and activities and suggestions for just absorbing the nature and the brilliance of each season within each part. And I have been having such a relaxing time reading this book. It is for middle grade, but I find it just wonderful as well. So I wanted to show you a little bit. First, it has these remarkable end papers. I also wanted to show you that it has much discussion of ancient structures. And I've always wanted to go to the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio. I am a lover of ancient prehistoric sites, and this book has wonderful discussion on that topic. One of my favorite flowers are cornflowers, so I loved this border. Each section or part has a beautiful illustration introducing it. And then I also wanted to show you this one in particular because of the rose and how to make a relaxing rose petal soak, which I am definitely going to do. One year I used natural ingredients to dye my Easter eggs, and the result was just remarkable. It was so nice. They came out so beautifully. One of my little sisters and I like to do some sort of craft together on Easter. And then there's also recipes throughout the book, like these pancakes here. And I am just in love with this book. It's a slow read. You read it as the seasons go along. I also want to tell you that Jessica Rue has a beautiful book that just came out a couple of days ago, Jane Austen's Garden, which looks amazing. And I wanted to get it to show you in this video. I thought, oh, I'll just make it an early birthday treat for myself. My birthday's in April. But my local bookstore didn't have it yet, so I will show it to you guys when I get it, but it just looks amazing. And it's about all the gardens in Jane Austen's novels, so I'm very excited to see it with Jessica Rue's illustrations, which are just beautiful. But yeah, so that is the Wheel of the Year for the 2020s. I normally end these videos off with a graphic novel, but I want to do something a little different this time and end them off with a book of poetry, because we have a book of poetry that we've been enjoying for probably a couple of years now, and that is Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright, an animal poem for each day of the year, with poems selected by Fiona Waters and illustrated by Britta Teckentrup. And Britta Teckentrup is a German illustrator now living in London, and I love her work. And this book of poetry is just wonderful. And my son and I will read that day's poem every morning, and we've been loving it. And it has poetry from not only William Blake, but also from Edgar Allan Poe, Elizabeth Coatsworth, who I just read you a little bit of her poetry earlier in this video, and Russell Hoban. And of course, the book has so many beautiful elements of each season, not only the illustrations, which are gorgeous, but also the poetry that is selected. And what I especially love about this one is how considerate it is. It kept in mind that there are children in the Southern Hemisphere as well. I always feel so bad because when I do these videos, I know that people who are watching me from the Southern Hemisphere have very different seasons to what we're experiencing. I guess you just have to watch my videos backwards, but I love how considerate this book is. So in January you have winter, but in the Southern Hemisphere it's full summer then, like the scene that's from Australia. And so it goes throughout the whole book. You'll have spring in the Northern Hemisphere, but in March, in Africa, it's the dry season, and things are beginning to turn yellow as winter is coming on. And I just think that is just so considerate, and I just love it. I had to show you this one because we've been having a bit of an issue. Our neighbor has a pileated woodpecker who is drilling such a large hole in their maple tree that we're afraid that it might rot and die and fall on the roof of their house. Every time the woodpecker comes to peck, we try to scare it away, but it's very hard because it's very high up there. Here's an autumn scene in May, a lovely summery scene in July, and here we get some beautiful November foliage. We've had this guy for quite a few years now. I think I first saw this one on Daisy from Beautiful Books. I think she had this one. And I saw it and completely fell in love with it. Well, that is it. I hope you have enjoyed these book recommendations by the decade. I hope you have a wonderful St. Patty's Day on Monday. Here in the Northern Hemisphere, it's only a few more days until the official start of spring, so I'm very excited for that. I will be back soon with another video, so until then, take care. Bye.